Well, it's a great privilege for me to be able to talk this day about something that is very dear to my heart, and that is the relationship between faith and the public sphere. It is one that I hold passionately, and I suppose in many ways the story of all this for me really began in a winter's day in South Africa in 1978. I received early in the morning a telephone call from a friend of mine, and it was obvious that he was very anxious and very excited. And he said, "Andrew, come on down," he said, "because the bulldozers have arrived, as we thought they might." What he was talking about was in fact an area outside of Cape Town called Crossroads. And Crossroads was a squatter camp, but it had many thousand residents. And these were all African people who had migrated into the big city of Cape Town to work, supposedly illegally, for their white counterparts. They brought with them their family and their children, and they lived in this place called Crossroads. But the South African government did not want Crossroads to exist. It was a blight, it was a problem. And so what my friend was talking about was the arrival of the bulldozers. These bulldozers had been threatened by the South African police to be used to remove people from the township. I was called because I'd been very much involved in what was known as the Student Health and Welfare Center organization at the University of Cape Town. And I was also involved with a group of Christian students and even multi-faith students who gave their time and their talents to work with the people in the squatter camp to be able to help them. Medical students helped them medically, law students helped them legally, and other students just simply were there to provide support and care. For there was no infrastructure, there was nothing for them, and we at the university were those that they could call on. So I arrived, and I finally got to Crossroads, and what I saw was terrible. Dogs were running in the streets. There were policemen standing with their rifles in hand, and these bulldozers that were lying side by side, starting to move on these homes. Now, these homes were shacks. They were tar paper, and they were corrugated steel, and they were barbed wire, but for those people, they had been home. And there were children running back into these camps, into these spaces, to get their teddy bears and their stuffed animals and their pets. People were frantically trying to get any semblance of their own belongings that they could, but they knew that the bulldozers were coming, and with the shouts of the children, with the barking of the dogs, and with the smell of the diesel in the air from these bulldozers, it made for a terrible, terrible scene. We were there to try and help them, and we were powerless against these bulldozers. And after they'd finished some of their work, they didn't go all the way. A number of us managed to get out of Crossroads. The problem was the world didn't know that this was happening. There was a ban on the media. The world media could have no knowledge of this. They tried to silence or arrest anyone who was going to be able to speak of it. But what was truly fascinating was that amongst that student body and amongst those who were providing aid there were people of different religious traditions. There were students who were Muslim, who lived on what was known as the Cape Flats, had come from Malay backgrounds and had settled in the Cape area. There were Jews who attended the University of Cape Town and who participated in Shawco. And there were people like myself who were Christians. And together we left that site and we started to let the world know what would happen. But how do we do that? Well, we did that through our churches. We informed ministers and clergy that what had taken place on that terrible day at Crossroads days before was such an atrocity, such an affront to what we believe in terms of humanity, that we had to let people know. So from the pulpits in Cape Town, from the imams who lived on the Cape Flats, even to the World Jewish Congress, word got out about what had happened at Crossroads, and it made a difference. because the world media started to hear about it through people of faith. And people of faith were even willing to risk themselves. There was one Anglican priest who was willing to lie down in front of the bulldozers to stop this atrocity. And he did it because of his commitment to the common humanity of us all, but also, in his case, for his love for Jesus Christ. And so, in a sense, the private life of a person of faith all of a sudden exploded into something very, very public. The BBC finally heard about it and brought cameras in. The Washington Post made note of it. And even now you can see on September the 15th to the 18th, 1978, the story is still online of what happened that day. Word got out. There was an international outpouring of concern, but all of it began from young people and people of faith who started to get the word out and were willing to risk everything for the sake of their fellow brothers and sisters, regardless of their race. And so I was moved by that. And I suppose my sense of what is public and what is private when it comes to our faith has been affected by what I saw take place in Crossroads in 1978. And I've never changed my opinion. And I haven't changed my opinion because I don't see a distinction really between a private faith and a public faith. I mean, we are, as human beings, whole. We have a spiritual side to us. We have a physical and an emotional and a mental side to us. We have a sociological and a cultural side to us. But faith is one of the things that animates people. It is one of the things that causes us to do the right thing in difficult circumstances, to stand for something moral and ethical and just. That our private faith and the convictions that we have are in fact an integral part of how we live our lives. What was fascinating was, in South Africa, is that one of the leaders of the country really opposed those of us who spoke out against the atrocities at Crossroads. Even though he himself was a person of faith, he says ultimately faith should be a private matter. And that by bringing it into the public realm, we are in fact being disingenuous to our faith. Well, we disagreed. I disagreed. I think Jesus would disagreed when he took his message to the streets, when he spoke to the ordinary common people, the fisher people, the people who were beside the road, when he told parables like the Good Samaritan, or said, "Whatever you do for the least of these my children, you have done it for me." And so I take my cue from Jesus. I don't take my cue from politicians who want to silence faith. But even today, there is still this challenge. There are those, it happened not long ago here in Canada, where a prominent CBC reporter suggested that religion should be kept behind closed doors. But keeping it behind closed doors is neither realistic, because in a sense it dehumanizes people for whom faith is really important, but it oftentimes silences the voices of conscience and morality and justice which arise from our faith. There are those who benefit, in fact, at times, from the silencing of the voices of faith. So I've challenged young people and the millennials who are gathered at this conference to think about how can they live their private life and their public life. I mean, I'm on social media like everybody else. I belong to some kinds of communities, such as those who support Manchester United Football Club, which I do, or IndyCar racing, where I'm a chaplain. I mean, there are parts of my life that are not particularly religious in many ways, although I am a chaplain with IndyCar. But it's a matter of having a public persona and presence. But I can't separate that, no matter how secular those things are, from being myself. I bring my faith and my convictions, just as we all do, to every part and facet of our lives. And so the challenge today is how to find a way in Canada and in the world that we are to live our private faith in a public way, and to live our public convictions animated by that private faith. This, to me, is one of the reasons why I think this Millennial Summit is so important, and why I think the work that Cardus has done in preparing this is something that should challenge us all. For all of those that are here from their various religious traditions, this is a common question. How do we bring our faith into the public sphere? For me, I think we have to do it because that's who we are.